In tonight's story, betrayal runs deep, but revenge runs deeper. You're listening to Revenge with Jack, where justice always finds its way. Evan, after 17 years, we're eliminating your position, Mark said, voice like a flat line on a heart monitor. Laura from HR sat beside him, tablet ready, eyes not quite meeting mine. I nodded once. It was Monday. The lights hummed. Somewhere down the hall a printer coughed like an old man clearing his throat. My name is Evan Hart, 54, until this morning the senior systems analyst at North Star Dynamics in Columbus, Ohio. I have lived most of my adult life between server racks and fluorescent ceilings. 3 CEOs rose and fell while I stayed, patching old code, shepherding cloud cutovers, resuscitating lost files at 2 a.m., answering alarms on Christmas mornings because the alarms did not know it was Christmas. I didn't ask why. The air in our hallway had changed weeks ago, colder, perfumed with new slogans. Transformation, efficiency, future-proof. I had watched my calendar thin and my permissions shrink by imperceptible clicks. It was like waking to find a wall move 2 inches in the night. You learn to notice that sort of thing when systems are your weather. I stood. Laura slid a folder across the desk. Cobra, acknowledgements, a scripted sentence about appreciation for my contributions. I signed what wasn't a trap and refused what was. I understand, I said. It felt strange to hear my voice behave. Back at my desk, screens glowed with work I had taught others to do. The young coders kept their eyes on their keyboards, hands like birds trying not to startle. Good people. Quick, clever. Few of them had ever seen the skeleton of the old architecture, the custom joints, the private switches buried 3 layers deep where the building's pulse could be felt. That was by design. Not their fault. My fault, a little. I packed slowly, like leaving a campsite clean. The family photo where Lily is missing a front tooth. The clay mug Maya teased me for keeping. The handle too big, the glaze uneven, the warmth perfect. The cactus that outlived reorg after reorg, small and rude and patient under artificial sun. My notebook with narrow handwriting, neat to the point of accusation. Carla from marketing stopped at my doorway, eyes wet, jaw set. Evan, I just heard. This is wrong. I gave a small shrug. Companies turn like schools of fish, all at once, then gone. You kept us afloat, she said, too loud. Heads lifted. I shook mine. It's fine, I said, softly, the way you tell a storm it will pass even as you know the roof will leak. I shut down my machine, logged out of everything, cleared caches I had built, left behind the tidy map of what used to be and wasn't anymore. As I walked to the elevator, Mark stepped into the hall and watched, hands clasped, the posture of a man conducting an audit of a person. No handshake. The door closed on his face like a lid. Downstairs, I returned my badge. The guard, who'd watched me age 1 renewal at a time, gave a small nod. Outside, the building caught the pale sky, 12 floors of mirrored certainty. I stood for a moment with the box against my hip, feeling the quiet that comes when a machine finally powers down. 17 years, and now the hum belonged to someone else. In the car, I set the box on the passenger seat. The cactus leaned toward me like a survivor. My hands rested on the wheel. I let the stillness settle, that particular silence after impact when you check for broken bones. I thought about servers breathing in the dark, about the audit rails I'd laid at legal's request years ago, the ones people had learned to ignore because they were quiet and honest. I started the engine, turned onto the street. The building slid behind me, shrinking in the rear view like an old idea. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. Something colder was stitching itself together, neat and careful, the way you thread a needle before you mend a seam. They thought the story ended with a cardboard box. Wednesday would be interesting. North Star used to be 2 rented floors above a dentist and a tax service, the kind of place where the carpet smelled like coffee and ambition. I started the year Lily learned to tie her shoes, when Maya still called my pager that beeping brick. Back then I knew every workstation by name and temperament. On Fridays we carried sheet cakes into the break room and celebrated migrations like birthdays. We built a thing that didn't yet have a logo on the skyline, only a pulse. Growth arrived sideways at first. New tickets, new acronyms, a second data closet. Then 1 acquisition, then 2. Each time we grafted unfamiliar code to our own, like sewing a sleeve from another shirt and praying the seam held. I became the person who made mismatched parts speak. Not a genius, just patient. Systems reward patience the way winter rewards people who stack wood in October. 3 CEOs arrived and left like weather fronts. I stayed, through dial-up's funeral, through virtualization's adolescence, through the cloud's grand entrance with its promises of elasticity and bills that read like poetry written by accountants. I wasn't loud. When someone panicked, I brought them a chair, a plan, and a sandwich. In a country that worships meteors, I learned to be gravity. Then came Mark Ellison, new title, new cadence. He wore the future like a fitted suit. IT resources, he called us, as if we were pallets of cabling. Meetings changed temperature. Whiteboards filled with verbs that had never sweated. Streamline, optimize, sunset. I tried to translate. Behind that dashboard is a duct-taped miracle, I'd say, smiling. He'd nod, eyes already looking past me toward a promise he could pitch upstairs. 6 months before the box on my passenger seat, we hired Ryan Mercer, a consultant whose handshake felt like a non-disclosure agreement. He praised our resilience, then recommended frameworks that sounded like motivational posters. He met with Mark behind glass, markers squeaking in confident angles. When I walked by, voices softened the way voices do around a patient they don't want to wake. That was when the wall began to move 2 inches at a time. A permission trimmed here, an approval step rerouted there. My access map, a landscape I could walk in the dark, developed fences that hadn't existed. No one said the word demotion. They said focus. They meant out of the way. Calendar invites thinned like hair. Projects I'd shepherded for a decade found younger hands. I was asked to document more, which is how you ask a veteran to pack his memories in labeled boxes. One afternoon, a memo about modernization phase 2 appeared on a screen 2 cubes over. Not in my inbox. Not in my folder. I stood in the aisle and read it from the edge like a neighbor reading your mail by accident. New org chart. New lines. My role a ghost. Later, in a meeting, Mark said, "We need to future-proof." The room nodded. I thought of the way a family future-proofs, by learning your grandparents' recipes before they forget the salt. I said nothing. At home, Maya poured tea and touched my wrist. "You're in your head," she said. I gave her the standard line about seasons and change. We've been married long enough for her to hear the hesitations inside my vowels. "Don't let them make you small," she said. It wasn't anger, it was a blessing. In our culture, we like second acts that look like fireworks. She prefers the kind that look like lanterns, steady, human. I kept working. I trained Noah, who reminds me of first-year me. Fast, kind, alert to the room. I wrote procedures as if I were already gone, not out of resignation, but out of respect for the people who would wake at 2 a.m. to the same alarms. On the side, I watched the audit rails I had laid years ago, little breadcrumb trails that never get applause because they aren't supposed to save the day. They're supposed to make sure we know what happened when the day goes wrong. The air in the building kept changing. I learned to breathe through it. I told myself I could leave with a clean conscience if it came to that. I didn't yet know what was growing under the floorboards. I only knew the house had started to creak in a new key, and that creaks are stories trying to be heard. Soon enough, I would listen. The thing about systems is they speak even when you stop listening. Late one evening, the office emptied to a hush that made the air feel padded. I stayed, letting a routine security sweep run in the background. A little cron job I'd written years ago when legal asked for quiet visibility. Nobody thanks you for the alarms that never ring. But drift is real. People push changes through on Friday afternoons. Vendors rename themselves. Good intentions leak. On screen, a pattern nudged my attention the way a toddler tugs a sleeve. Recurring payments, small and neat, to a vendor I didn't recognize. Apex Solutions Group. The name was generic enough to pass as furniture. The amounts were ordinary at first, the accounting version of Inside Voices. Then month to month, a slow rise. Not reckless, just confident. I opened the payment trail. Invoice memos referenced license renewals I knew by heart. The numbers were wrong in a quiet way. 15% here, 20 there, the kind of inflation that hides inside a rounding error. A lot of theft looks like tips. Curiosity is a muscle. I checked formation records. Apex had been registered last year. The listed address led to a UPS store in a strip mall that sells prepaid phones and lottery dreams. No website. No staff photos with crossed arms and white smiles. Just a box number pretending to be a door. I didn't blow a whistle. I wrote the date in my notebook, like a sailor noting a new current. Copied the invoices. Captured the approval trail. The audit rails I'd built, those quiet breadcrumbs everyone forgot about after the compliance meeting, lit up in thin, polite lines. Each payment wore the same approving fingerprint, Conrad Hale, our CFO, the man whose suits looked like they came with their own opinions. I could have marched into Mark's office with a printout and a question mark. I could have sent a flagged email and watched it vanish into management tone. Instead, I breathed. In my family, we say, measure twice, speak once. I wanted more than a suspicion. I wanted a map. Days passed. Each night, I checked the river. The transfers grew like ivy, slow and certain. I matched invoice dates against internal license schedules. The legitimate renewals were real. The padding wrote on top, like foam. Good cover. Auditors hunting for ghosts wouldn't notice a sweater worn one size too big. At home, the house had that winter quiet feel, even in spring. Lily texted from campus photos of library views and bad coffee. Maya folded laundry with the same calm I try to bring to a failing cluster. You're traveling somewhere in your head, she said, not unkind. I kissed her hair and changed the subject. She let me. Marriage is sometimes a series of permissions we grant each other to keep our balance. One afternoon, I took a longer route back from lunch and stopped at the UPS store. Through the glass, a man fed paper into a shredder that sounded like rain. Rows of identical boxes blinked their little brass numbers, each one a small secret. I wrote down the suite number, the unit, the minute of the day. Little things matter when big things try to look normal. Back at my desk, I opened a clean text file and began a ledger, not just amounts and dates, but context, who logged in when, which approvals hop time zones, what the server thought at exactly 2:17 on the night a new vendor profile appeared. Systems remember what people misremember. By the end of the week, I had enough to feel the shape of it in my palm. I ran one more thread. The registered owner of Apex, a man named Derek Walsh. Social media did the rest with its smiling betrayals. Wedding photos tagged, anniversaries celebrated. Derek at a family barbecue, Conrad beside him with a beer, captioned brothers by choice, family by marriage. Elise Hale liked the photo with 3 hearts. There it was. Not a smoking gun. A warm one, cooling. My pulse slowed. I wasn't angry yet. Anger burns too fast for work like this. What I felt was the steadiness of a level placed on a crooked shelf. Bubble to the right. Truth leaning in one direction. I saved everything to the offsite archive legal had once demanded and then forgotten. I logged out, turned off the monitor, and sat in the dark a minute, listening to the fans settle. Sometimes the house creaks because it's old. Sometimes it creaks because someone moved weight where weight doesn't belong. I had my first answer. The next ones would require care. The morning after felt like a room after a party, the quiet a little sticky, the air full of what had been said. No alarm. No commute. Just the soft scrape of Maya, setting a mug on my desk. Strong, she said. Her hand rested on my shoulder for a breath. We have been married long enough to know when words help and when heat does. She left the door ajar. The house listened without interrupting. I sat in my small home office, the one with Lily's childhood drawings framed between certifications I've never shown off. The light came through the blinds in measured bars. I opened the bottom drawer. Took out the metal lockbox I'd labeled with a code only I would find funny. Inside, the flash drives waited like winter fruit. We are a family of backups. Extra rice in the pantry, emergency cash in a cookbook, redundant copies of the things we cannot afford to lose. Company policy forbids taking data offsite. Years ago, legal asked me to design an insider threat audit that included contingency storage. I wrote the plan. They signed. Everyone forgot. I did not. I plugged in a drive. The cursor blinked like a steady heart. I began where my notes ended. Emails, meeting minutes, payment logs. Internal chatter we pretend is harmless when we're moving too fast. I built a spreadsheet the way a carpenter planes would, slow, with the grain. Dates on one axis, vendors on another, approvals like little fingerprints stamped in the cells. I added a column for quiet increases. Another for who was on vacation. Pattern work is half math, half listening. There it was. A full history of transfers to Apex Solutions Group. 18 months. Almost $1.8 million. Nothing spectacular. Just the kind of steady rain that floods a basement because no one checked the sump. I traced each invoice to its sibling inside Northstar's real license renewals. The mismatch hovered between 15 and 20%, enough to tuck under the word variance. Enough to buy a lake house if you were patient. I clicked into the vendor profile. Ownership, Derek Walsh. I remembered his face from a sunburned July photo. Conrad's brother by marriage. I cross-checked addresses. The UPS store. I pulled state filings anyway, because systems like to be asked twice. Same result. Deregulated discretion wearing a suit. Approval chain, Conrad Hale. Every time. My jaw did not clench. My hands did not shake. Anger is a loud tool. I reached instead for the small, precise one, control. I added a tab to the sheet for Conrad Access Orbit. 18 months ago, he'd requested expanded privileges on financial approvals. I have the ticket because I keep the tickets that matter. The change had been logged on a Thursday, 5:42 p.m., the time of day when people file the things they don't want discussed. I wrote that down. I kept going. Meeting minutes where cost optimization wore its pretty mask. Threads where Mark used phrases like trusted partner and streamlined procurement, words that act like smoke machines. I saved attachments. I preserved headers. I took screenshots of the audit rails I designed, those thin lines of truth that make a timeline when you lay them side by side. In another life, maybe I'd have been an archivist. In this one, I was building a story a board could not ignore or explain away. Maya checked in with the softness of a person who has learned the difference between rescue and respect. Store run, she said. Need anything? I shook my head. After she left, the house grew even quieter, like a library after closing. I opened the window a crack. Cold air woke the room. The numbers did their small, honest multiplication. I followed them until they stopped hiding. I could see the path now. Inflate legitimate renewals just enough, route approvals through one door, funnel money to a box that calls itself a company. It's elegant in the way pickpocketing is elegant. You admire the technique even as you inventory what's gone. I leaned back, felt something shift inside. Not fury, not grief. Something colder that can hold its breath for a long time. In my family, we were taught not to humiliate, to correct cleanly. If I moved, I would move with the courtesy precision demands. I labeled the report NDS, Apex, Prelim. I copied it to 2 more drives, and the offsite archive legal doesn't remember authorizing. I wrote a single line at the top. Evidence, not accusation. Then I closed the file and let the machine work to its tidy halt. They had taken my badge. They had not taken my witness. Tomorrow, I would place it where the light is. Wednesday, I parked across from Northstar's glass facade and let the morning arrange itself. People streaming through revolving doors, backpacks and paper cups, the small choreography of a workday beginning. The building looked untroubled. That's the thing about facades. They reflect clouds, not plumbing. On the passenger seat, my laptop hummed, already signed into an address I'd created years ago for red team drills. It looked like an internal alias. It wasn't in any directory that counted. At 9:15 a.m., I sent a message to Mark. Subject, financial irregularities, urgent review. I kept it clean. Bullet points. Invoice IDs. A thumbnail graph of Apex increases hugging the real renewals like a shadow. I did not mention family ties. I did not accuse. I simply held up a mirror. By 9:45, my phone rang. Mark's number. I let it pass to voicemail. His voice came through tight, like a man trying to untie a knot without admitting it's a knot. Evan, call me. Immediately. I closed my eyes, listened to the city sound around me. Bus brakes, a distant siren, a robin arguing with a piece of sky. I relocated to a coffee shop 3 blocks away where the barista spelled my name, even, which felt about right. At 10:30, an email landed from HR. Laura, precise as a stapler. We've received concerning communication that may violate the terms of your separation. Please cease all contact with Northstar personnel and remember your confidentiality obligations. I smiled into my cup. There was no separation agreement. They had rushed the prop onto the stage hoping the audience wouldn't notice the wet paint. At noon, I drove to my bank, the quiet downtown branch with a carpet that remembers every shoe. Inside the safe deposit box lay an older backup, the kind that smells a little like dust and insurance. Among the files, the original access change tickets I'd archived for high-risk systems. 18 months earlier, exactly when Apex sprouted, Conrad had requested expanded authority on financial approvals. Not delegated. Expanded. Authorized at 5:42 p.m. on a Thursday, a time people slip things through the crease between attention and dinner. I photographed the paper trail on my phone out of habit, then scolded myself and printed clean copies. Good evidence deserves daylight, not pixels. When I got home, 3 missed calls stacked like dominoes. Mark, Laura, and now Ryan, the consultant with the handshake like a non-disclosure. A notification blinked from Noah. You okay? They're saying you sent a wild email about fraud. Emergency meeting. They're scrubbing your old permissions, even historical logs. I typed back, don't get involved. Just observe. The hardest thing to teach is when not to help. At 3 p.m., the landline rang. That number rarely rings. It carries a different kind of gravity. I answered and said nothing. Evan, came the voice, smooth with an edge. Conrad Hale. We should talk about your concerns. Is that what we're calling them? I asked. Transitions create noise, he said. There are proper channels for questions. The board. The board doesn't usually approve UPS boxes as vendors, I said, keeping my tone even. Or brothers-in-law. A breath caught on his end, small but honest. You're making a mistake, he said, dropping the velvet. We can make this right. Generous severance. References. Let's not escalate. There are moments when anger wants to drive. I let patience hold the wheel. Goodbye, Conrad, I said, and hung up. 10 minutes later, Laura emailed again. My severance, once modest, had doubled and acquired new conditions with lots of boldface. Strict confidentiality, non-disparagement, no contact. It read like someone had fed fear into a template. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened my report, tightened one paragraph, added a clear index. I wrote a single sentence at the top in larger font. This is a systems failure with financial consequences. Then I queued a second email, not to HR, not to Mark, to someone who still read footnotes and asked the right kind of questions. I set the delivery for tomorrow at 8 a.m., 15 minutes before the finance committee was scheduled to meet. Outside, afternoon light slid down the houses like a hand smoothing a wrinkled sheet. Maya came to the doorway. I steady. I told her only that I'd started a process I trusted. Good, she said. Then breathe. I breathed. The next move would be quiet and very bright. Sleep came in thin strips that night, like tape on a cracked window. I woke before the house, made coffee in the quiet, and let the data spread across my screen like a map unrolled on a kitchen table. When I'm worried, I tidy. When I'm determined, I pattern. The apex column had form now, a curve like a hill you could walk without losing breath. I asked myself the old question. If they found one trail that stayed dry in the rain, why wouldn't they lay another? I widened the lens. Vendor master list. 5 years. Sort by consulting, by strategy, by anything that wears a suit to do manual labor. There it was, Lakeside Business Solutions, older than Apex, same perfume of vagueness. The invoices were polite and slightly inflated for process redesign and license optimization assessments, as if the English language were a fog machine. I cross-checked incorporation records. CEO, Elise Hale, Conrad's wife. The address, a virtual office with a wall of mail slots and a receptionist who could pronounce anyone's last name with professional warmth. The payments to Lakeside didn't shout. They strolled. Partial deliverables paired with PowerPoints that made verbs work overtime. Some work had been done, just enough to pass a squint test. The overage was the trick. Not counterfeit bills, just coins shaved thinner. When auditors hunt for zeros that should be 8s, they often miss the 8s that should have been 6s. I logged dates. I paired them with budget cycles, quarter closes, cost optimization, town halls where Mark smiled at the audience and clicked through slides illustrated with arrows going up. Ryan, the consultant, threaded through this fabric like decorative stitching. His firm had been brought in through a special procurement loop, bypassing the usual comparison quotes with a memo citing time sensitivity. I followed calendar invites like breadcrumbs. Mark and Ryan booked rooms with glass walls and wrote the future in squeaks and diagonals, while my team kept the present from falling down. In emails, Ryan talked modernization waves. Mark replied with resource realignment, after which my org chart shed 3 boxes like leaves. I built a second sheet for motive. Not courtroom motive, the humankind. Mark's unit got budget boosts in quarters when Lakeside and Apex were fattest. Other departments tightened belts, learned to make do. In town halls, he praised discipline. The way a man compliments you for skipping lunch when he has a sandwich in his desk. Numbers are not proof of character, but they do write biographies with fewer adjectives. Patterns can be seductive. They start to look like fate. So I tried to break my own argument. I checked random vendors. I sampled benign renewals. I measured slopes and outliers. I invited doubt to walk around and tap the beams. What stayed standing? 3 years of siphon in slow motion. I totaled both streams, Lakeside's fat fees and Apex's padded renewals, then discounted for my own caution. The estimate settled near $4.3 million. Enough to end a career. Enough, spread thinly, to pass for fog. I took a break. Watched the neighborhood wake. A man jogged by in a college sweatshirt older than the freshman carrying coffee behind him. Somewhere a dog barked at an invented enemy. I thought about how our culture likes tidy villains and dramatic monologues. But most theft looks like just this once, repeated in good lighting. You can hate the people. I prefer to hate the shortcuts. Back at the screen, I added a narrative page. Plain words, no blood. The scheme relies on reality with a surcharge, I wrote. Real licenses, real consulting, priced as though money grows on trees behind compliance. I printed 3 copies, one for my safe, one for the envelope I would hand to a man who reads footnotes, and one to remind me that paper still anchors what pixels pretend to hold. Before noon, my phone buzzed again. Recruiters, 2 of them, with sudden interest and generous signing bonuses. News travels through the same vents as rumor. I set the phone face down. The point wasn't a softer chair. The point was to restore gravity. At lunch, Maya slid a bowl of soup toward me. You look like you've named a storm, she said. I told her only this. It's not a hurricane. It's a leak. She nodded in that way she has, approving the metaphor, approving the restraint. In our house, we don't celebrate revenge. We celebrate repairs. I returned to the desk and zipped the folder. I could feel the edges of the next move like a door under my palm. When you build a case, the temptation is to knock loudly. I plan to turn the handle. I've learned that not all allies are loud. Some are the kind of people who bring their own pen to meetings and leave with their questions folded neatly in a notebook. Victor Nguyen was that sort, semi-retired board member, the only one who ever read the appendices when I presented audit trails years ago. He once stopped by our war room at midnight during a breach drill and brought oranges for the team. Vitamin C for vigilance, he'd said, smiling like a man who understood how long a night could be. I called him from the quiet of my kitchen, steam lifting from a second cup of coffee. He answered on the second ring. Evan, he said, as if we'd spoken yesterday. I told him I had material he would want to see and that I wasn't interested in theater. 15 minutes, I said. No more. He named a park 3 miles from North Star, the one where joggers circle a pond that reflects whatever the sky is doing. We sat on a bench in a patch of winter sun that had no right to feel warm. I handed him a plain envelope, 1-page summary, index, and a drive labeled with a string that meant something only to me. I spoke in short sentences, the way you do when you don't want the listener to mistake your tone for anger. He read the first page, and I watched his face move from polite to present. You're not asking for your job back, he said. No, I said. I'm asking the company to stop leaking. He slid the envelope into his coat, like a priest tucking away a psalm. Finance committee meets tomorrow, he said. We can call an emergency session before it. If this checks, there will be motion. I nodded. I've queued a delivery, I added. Board inboxes. 8 a.m. tomorrow. He gave me a small look, half approval, half caution. You've always favored clean logs, he said. So do I. On the walk back to my car, my phone shook with messages I didn't open. Recruiters again, heard you might be on the market, with titles that sounded like promotions and paragraphs praising the very quiet I'd been punished for. I stored their names like you store rainwater. Useful later, irrelevant now. Maya texted, everything okay? Do you need me to be home? I answered, all good. Back by 2. We've grown old enough to understand that being needed is different from needing to be present. She chooses presence. At home, the doorbell rang. Our camera caught Ryan Mercer on the porch in a tailored coat pretending to be casual. His smile turned to the lens like a man auditioning for a version of himself. Maya opened the door just enough for kindness. He launched into urgency. Misunderstandings, opportunities to collaborate, the importance of context. She told him I was out. He left a card with edges sharp enough to cut bread. We watched the video together later, and she raised an eyebrow. Consultants always look like they know a secret even when they don't, she said. We let the card live in a drawer with spare batteries and tape. I spent the afternoon labeling duplicates and checking hashes, the small rituals that make a story unarguable. I took one last walk through the audit rails, treating each entry like a stepping stone across cold water. The timeline held. If anyone tried to say the river wasn't there, I could lead them from stone to stone without getting their shoes wet. As dusk leaned in, I prepared the scheduled email. Subject line plain. Before you approve Q2 bonuses, read this. Attachments named like they meant business. I added a short note at the top. Evidence follows. Interpret as you must. Actions leave trails. No flourish. No accusation. Just the weight of arranged facts. I set the send for 8 a.m., 15 minutes before the committee convened. Enough time for eyes to widen, not enough for the usual choreography of deflection. Noah pinged at 7:11 p.m. They're tense. Hallway talk feels electric. Stay safe. I thanked him and reminded him that sometimes the bravest thing is to keep your hands by your sides. He sent a thumbs up that looked too young for what the morning would bring. Before bed, I stood at the window and watched our street do its ordinary evening. Porch lights, a kid practicing a skateboard trick until it clicked, someone grilling despite the chill. Cultures teach revenge as fire. Families teach repair as warmth. I slipped under the covers beside Maya, and she pressed her feet against mine like we were making a circuit. Tomorrow, she asked. Tomorrow, I said. The house settled. The fan in the hallway hummed like a distant server room. 8 a.m. is only a number. But some numbers ring like a bell. Morning arrived clean, the kind of Ohio blue that pretends nothing complicated happens under it. I sat on the porch with coffee and watched the neighborhood perform its small rituals. Dog walkers, a school bus pausing like a held breath, a jogger measuring the sidewalk with patient feet. At 7:59 a.m., my laptop's clock ticked once. At 8 o'clock, the scheduled email left my outbox and threaded itself into 10 board inboxes like a wire pulled through conduit. No fanfare, just flight. Silence is a kind of instrument. I listened to it play. At 8:07, an unknown number called. I let it go. At 8:11, another. At 8:15, 3 in a row. I pictured a long table, leather chairs, papers being shuffled with the urgent dignity people use when their stomach drops. The subject line had been plain. Before you approve Q2 bonuses, read this. But plain words can be thunder if you put them in the right sky. By 8:23, Victor texted, eyes on. Committee pulled into side room. Some faces pale. Hold steady. I replied with a single dot, our shorthand for received. The porch light across the street clicked off. Somewhere, a garage door opened as if nothing in the world were breaking. At 9:02, my phone flashed private number. I answered. Mr. Hart, Dana Brooks, General Counsel. We need you to come in immediately to discuss materials you've distributed to the board. Her voice had the professional calm of a surgeon. I'm available by phone, I said. In person isn't necessary. She began to outline policy and protocol. I let her finish. Everything I have is already replicated in multiple secure locations, I said, evenly. If anything happens to me or my family, full packages go to the SEC, State AG, and 3 news desks with time-stamped audit logs. This is not a threat. It's a contingency plan. There was the smallest pause, the kind trained people allow themselves when they meet a locked door. Understood, she said. The board is taking this seriously. Good, I said. So am I. We ended the call like 2 people carefully setting down glass. At 9:17, local business media cracked the surface. Northstar Dynamics calls emergency finance review. Sources cite irregularities, the kind of headline that floats because it hasn't been given names yet. I didn't post. I didn't refresh. I waited. The way you wait on hold for a result you already know. At 9:32, Noah texted, police are here. Conrad and Mark in separate rooms. Ryan looked seasick. What did you do? I read it twice and let the phone face down on the armrest. This part was never the point, but it was always a possibility. Sometimes systems correct themselves only when gravity is reintroduced. By 9:50-something, my porch felt too exposed, So I drove 20 miles to a diner that sells coffee like confession, bottomless, unadorned, and a little too hot. I took a corner booth. The waitress called me Han, like I'd earned it. I ate eggs slowly and watched daylight ferry itself across the linoleum. A TV in the corner ran silent captions about markets and weather maps. No one said my name. Good. At 10:12, Victor called, no text this time. It's a bloodbath, he said without preface. Conrad folded fast. He's giving dates and doors he walked through, blaming Mark for pushing. Mark is denying with both hands. Ryan claims he only drew pictures and never looked at the numbers. He exhaled. We've suspended all 3 pending investigation. Forensic accountants start Monday. Early read. North of 4.5 million siphoned. I looked at the coffee in my cup and saw a small, steady circle. You'll have what you need, I said. You already gave it, he answered. The rest is arithmetic. After we hung up, my phone lit again and again. Unknowns, reporters, a recruiter who now used words like transformational. I let them all pass like weather through a window you don't intend to open. The point of a repair isn't applause. It's that the roof stops leaking. By noon, the diner thinned. I paid in cash and tipped heavy because someone should get good news today. Outside, the October light had that generous angle it saves for ordinary streets. I drove the long way home past the river, where ducks peloton in their tidy line and no one calls it leadership. Back at the house, Maya met me with that look that blends question and answer. It's moving, I said. Good, she replied. We stood a while without talking, listening to the quiet the way you listen to a server room after the patch finally takes. No alarms. Only the hum that means the work is holding. Monday I wore a suit that remembered weddings and graduations more than boardrooms. The security guard who'd watched me age behind a badge printed a visitor pass and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Hart," with a new gravity, like he'd just learned the difference between a password and a key. The elevator sided me up to a floor I'd never had reason to visit. Carpets that softened footsteps. Art that pretended spreadsheets were sunsets. The boardroom was all glass and Lakewood, and a table longer than some of our first budgets. 10 directors. Victor near the end, a small nod anchoring me. At the head sat the interim CEO, Elaine Porter, our former COO, hands folded as if holding a fragile object. "Mr. Hart," she began, "thank you for coming." She spoke about the breadth of the problem, the seriousness of the findings, the decision to place Conrad, Mark, and Ryan on leave pending investigation. Numbers had grown since Friday. Nearly $5.2 million diverted if you followed each thread to its ragged end. Her voice didn't waver. I respected the steadiness. I listened. Silence is a tool. When they paused, I set a thin folder on the table and slid it toward Elaine. "These are my conditions," I said. No apology in it, no triumph either. Just the math of what it would take to fix the roof and keep it from leaking again. She opened the folder. "Read." Her eyebrows lifted at the second page. "Full audit authority across all departments," she said aloud, eyes scanning for the trap. "Unfettered access to logs, approvals, vendor onboarding, and exception paths." I nodded. "If you hire a locksmith, don't ask him to pick the front door and then leave the back gate bolted." She turned the page. "Independent security budget," she continued. "Controlled by your office, not subject to operating offsets without board consent. If the fire department has to ask accounting for more hose during a blaze," I said, "we'll lose the house." Another page. "Veto power on financial technology decisions," she read, "including procurement of tools that affect auditability, identity, or spend visibility." Veto with explanation, I added. "I don't need to win every debate. I need the ability to stop a bad pattern before it becomes a culture." The room adjusted itself around those words, the micro shifts of people recalibrating the shape of a day. Someone asked about reporting lines. "Directly to the board," I said. "Operationally collaborative, structurally independent." Victor's pen paused above his notebook, then resumed. Elaine looked up. "This is unusual," she said, not unkindly. "So is embezzling $5.2 million through polite invoices," I said. I kept my tone even, the way you speak to a server that will reboot if you raise your voice. They asked questions, scope, staffing, timelines. I answered in verbs and guardrails. I was not selling a title. I was proposing a posture, one where truth had a standing invitation and logs were not back office, but story. When the room fell quiet, I stood. You have until noon, I said. I have other offers. I don't need a corner office. I need the authority to make this work hold. It wasn't theater. It was a boundary. In the hallway afterward, Victor caught up. Did you plan this all along, Evan? He asked, half smile, half test. I looked at the view, Columbus stretching out like a grid of decisions. I didn't plan to be fired, I said. Everything after that was just me doing my old job properly. Identify vulnerabilities, apply controls. I rode the elevator down and stepped into sunlight that felt more precise than warm. At 11:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. A single line from Elaine, accepted as written. Welcome, Chief Information Security Officer. I let out a breath I hadn't titled yet. At home, I opened my neglected LinkedIn and typed a sentence I'd been measuring in my head all weekend. Never burn bridges. Let them collapse under the weight of their own shortcuts. Then build something better in the clear. I pressed post and closed the laptop before the hearts and comments could turn a repair into applause. Maya read the message over my shoulder. Bridges? She asked. I took her hand. Some you walk away from, I said. Some you rebuild with wider lanes and better guardrails. She kissed my temple like a benediction. Noon bells rang somewhere out of sight. I felt the new span take weight. 6 months teaches you the shape of an aftermath. Columbus winter thawed into a spring that smelled like new lumber, and I learned the rhythm of my new badge, the doors it opened, the questions it insisted I ask. My office on the corner wasn't a prize, it was a vantage point. From here the skyline looked patient, like a graph that had learned to stop pretending. Outcomes arrived in official envelopes and morning headlines. Conrad Hale pled to multiple counts, wire fraud, conspiracy. The statement from his attorney said words like cooperation and regret, the vocabulary of men who've measured their next decade in calendars. He traded swiftness for mercy and got some of both. Mark Ellison took the long road, fighting each accusation as if denial were a skill set. He stood in interviews with the poise of a man who'd rehearsed innocence and was surprised by the echo. Ryan Mercer tried to outrun jurisdiction, Brazil, a rental with bad curtains, then learned that borders are merely lines on maps when the papers are in order. He came back in handcuffs that gleamed too much under airport light. The auditor's final tally landed just a hair above what I'd sketched at my kitchen table. $5.2 million diverted, most of it traced and recovered. Enough found to make the company solvent not only in cash but in conscience. On my floor, we rebuilt quietly. I moved Noah into operations lead, not because he asked, but because he listened like a person who understands that logs are a language. He still types too fast when he's excited. I bought him a better wrist rest and a chair that fits his back. We wrote new playbooks together, plain sentences, no flourishes, then walked them through at 2 a.m. drills until the team could do them with sleep still on their voices. People like to say culture is a poster. It isn't. It's who brings coffee to the person on pager duty and who answers the 3:14 a.m. ping without making someone feel small for needing help. I made rounds every morning, the same path: identity, finance, procurement, the humble systems that move money and permission. We built dashboards that refused to be pretty at the expense of clarity. I asked for red lights where yellow had been fashionable. Elaine, now full CEO, signed the budget Victor texted about months ago with a simple note: approved. Unanimous. It wasn't the number that mattered, it was the vote. Trust feels like being handed a heavy object and knowing they expect you to keep it safe. Maya came by on Thursdays, a ritual we didn't name. She'd stand in my doorway with a smile that made the room look like home and ask, "Lunch?" We'd walk through the department, and I'd watch conversations slow, not from fear, but from the courtesy people give to the person who didn't let the roof cave in. Maya squeezed my hand in the elevator like she was checking the current. "Happy?" she asked once, not softly, not hard. I thought about the first Monday, the cardboard box, the cactus leaning toward me like a survivor. Happiness felt like the wrong unit of measure. "I'm good," I said. Satisfaction, maybe. Completion. The sense that a bridge had been rebuilt with better footings and clearer signage. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the glass. The older man in a suit he used to reserve for weddings, now learning the tempo of governance. I kept on my desk the mug Lily made when Glaze didn't obey her yet, its handle too big for the cup. It held the right amount of coffee for a night shift. When the building was quiet, I'd wrap my fingers around it and remember the slow years when patience looked like anonymity and thoroughness wasn't a headline. Victor still calls without preamble. The last time, he said, the budget increase? Unanimous again. No speeches. We're learning. I smiled into the phone and thought of bridges. Some you let collapse under the weight of shortcuts. Some you shore. And some, once repaired in daylight with honest materials, carry more weight than they ever did before. We stepped outside one noon into a clear October sun. The city hummed. My phone buzzed and I didn't look. Maya tilted her head, waiting. Just thinking, I said. About how systems remember. About how people can, too. She nodded like a verdict. We crossed at the light, and the world, for a moment, felt synchronized.